Hi everyone, hope you're all doing really well and welcome to my spoiler-free review and discussion of The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. Buckle up folks, I think this is going to be a long one. My review is currently sitting at about 4,000 words, however I'm going to cut out the last part and possibly put that into a different video. As I said, this will be spoiler free, so if you've not read the book, I will be just discussing my thoughts on it as I had quite mixed opinions of it, and it's a very long book, so I've got lots of things to say. So without any further ado, let's go. So the synopsis of the book I will just read out because it's quite a difficult one to describe, I think, because there's a lot going on. So the synopsis is: a world divided, a queendom without an heir, an ancient enemy awakens. The House of Berethnet has ruled Innis for 1,000 years. Still unwed, Queen Sabran IX must conceive a daughter to protect her realm from destruction. But assassins are getting closer to her door. Eid Durian is an outsider at court. Though she was risen to position of lady-in-waiting, she is loyal to a hidden society of mages. Eid keeps a watchful eye on Sabran, secretly protecting her with forbidden magic. Across the Dark Sea, Tanae has trained to be a dragon rider since she was a child, but is forced to make a choice that could see her life unravel. Meanwhile, the divided East and West refuse to parley and forces of chaos are rising from their sleep. Spooky. So you follow four characters from their point of view. You follow Eid, that you've already mentioned, Tanae, who you've already mentioned, as well as someone called Nicholas Bruce and Loth. So I'll start with the plot. I find the plot to be quite interesting, and this is definitely a plot-driven story. Like, if you like your character-driven stuff, this is not the book for you. This is definitely a plot-driven story. A lot of people find the beginning to be quite slow. I did read this as a buddy read in a Discord, and a lot of people did find the beginning to be quite slow, but I actually really liked it because it's such a big book with a big sort of like world, different countries, different beliefs, all these myths and stuff. I actually quite liked the beginning taking its time to establish all of this. I never felt confused about who was where and who believed what and what the different religions are and what the different, emperors and queendoms and stuff were. I thought it did a really, really good job of setting up the world and explaining exactly what's going on and what the different conflicts are. Like I said, I never felt lost, which was great. The plot also focuses on the looming threat of the dragons. They're sort of like the main antagonists really for this book. You've got these type of dragons called High Westerns, and they're like the fire-breathing dragons, and in the past there was this great big fuck-off dragon called the Nameless One who was huge and like killed a bunch of people and then was defeated, and there's like a prophecy or like rumours that he's starting to rise again, and that's like the main sort of like conflict of the book. The big mega dragons kind of referred to in his generals and stuff are like the dragons that we see, and I like, it does feel it's sort of building up to whether or not the Nameless One is going to return and stuff. I did quite like just how those antagonists really were built up in the story. I did like the initial plot of assassins coming for Sabran. That's sort of a main mystery for like the first kind of half of the book. I thought it was a really interesting plot point because not only do you have the looming threat of the Nameless One and his generals, but then you also have someone on the human side who's trying to kill the Queen and what their motivations and stuff might be. I really liked that mystery and how that was built up. And it was a good starting point for Eid's journey. Like, you get to know Eid, who she works for, and kind of her opinion of Sabran and the place that she has in court. However, I did find that whole plot point with, the assassins and stuff to be over very quickly once it was over, if that makes any sense. So it was drawn out as quite a large portion of the book. But then, once you find out who is sending the assassins, it's just like, okay, plot point over, let's move on. There was not much guessing as to who it might be. Eid has her initial suspicions sort of thing, and then it never really goes past that until you then find out who it really is. With things like that and mysteries, especially with like court politics sort of thing, I love it when you don't feel you can trust anyone and you're kind of pointing the finger here, there and everywhere. I really wish there had been a bit more of that, but overall, it was a really, really interesting plot point. I just felt it perhaps ended a bit too abruptly. A lot of the plot points in this book kind of feel underdeveloped, or in a similar way, built up, and then over really, really quickly. It's kind of the same with Sabran's refusal to marry. This was a really interesting plot point because it's made very clear in the book that she needs to marry and produce an heir because there is the belief in Innis in this world that as long as someone from Sabran's bloodline sits on the throne, the Nameless One will not be able to arise. Now that's sort of like, believed by some people, believed by not. It's a little bit of a mystery throughout the book as to whether or not that's actually true. but obviously just, you know, for safety's sake, they sort of act as though it is true, you know, just in case it does turn out to be true, and obviously, you know, yada yada. So, you know, Sabran's refusal to marry and produce an heir is obviously quite an important plot point. But again, I feel like it wasn't really as developed as perhaps it could have been, and again, over very quickly, and yeah, that's just kind of my whole issue with this book in general. It's a plot-focused book, a plot-driven book, yet a lot of the plot points are either built up and then close and then finish abruptly, or there's no build-up, so they come completely out of left field. And it's kind of resolved, and Sabran's refusal to marry, and you know, it's really built up as this huge issue, but then it kind of almost gets resolved really quickly, and then we're on to a different problem. So yeah, the pacing of this was a little interesting. You know, the plot points or character journeys or even characters are introduced and built up as, oh, well, this is the next thing we're going to have to deal with, and then it either takes a left field and we don't see it and it doesn't actually happen and we go off doing something else, or it happens off page. It almost felt like the author spent the entire time trying to subvert expectations, but at every single turn, and that gets really old very quickly. So like, I don't know, this is not a portion of the book, I'm just going to make this up on top of my head. So let's say E's going to try and find out who's sending the assassins, so she's in her room and she's like, right, I'm going to do this plan, I'm going to lie in wait and do this, you know, and it's really built up, and maybe we see her planning this whole excursion to lie in wait, and she's, you know, making up her excuses as to where she'll be that night so nobody knows she's going to do it. Let's say we spend like 2 chapters following her do that. We will then either not see that happen and it will have no consequence on the story, or she won't do it and she'll be off doing something else and be like, oh yeah, I was going to do that bit, I'm off doing this now. Like, I don't know, really bad example, but I thought we kind of get what I mean. It just felt like she was, you know, as I said, building everything up to go, oh, you thought that was going to happen, well, we're doing this now. So I did find that very irritating. Almost everything kind of then felt anticlimactic. You know, there was no, as I said, the pacing was just completely off, and I think that makes the book really suffer in comparison. I think that's an issue a lot of people have with the story. With Tanny's plotline, you know, you expect to see her going through the dragon trials. You know, it's built up that she's gonna go through these trials and prove herself, and even build up like a rivalry with another character and a friendship with some other characters. Again, almost all the trials happen off page. I think we see one, and even then not all of it. You know, and then this character that's supposed to be her rival is mentioned at the beginning of the story, but then kind of once Tanny's plotline moves forward, he's never mentioned again until the end of the book. So it's like, what the fuck was the point of that? Like, you could delete this one character and have the exact same story, and there's unfortunately a lot of characters that you could do that with. I think Samantha Shannon wanted to have these characters and have this whole cast of characters, you know, like a lot of epic fantasy does have, but she almost didn't have the balls to commit to actually making them a character in her story. And yeah, I just found, you know, that to be quite irritating as well. Like I said, you know, characters get introduced and then killed off immediately, or they get introduced and then are never seen again. It's just like, why are they here? Why are you making me learn about them if they're not going to be important? Like this guy, you know, like this guy who's her rival, you know, he's not even a plot device. You know, like some of the other characters that get introduced are plot devices, or they will push the story through in some way. This guy, you know, you could delete him and have the exact same story for Tanny. It has literally no... He's literally just there to be a bully for like a few chapters and then he's gone. So it's like, what was the point of that? There's a lot of Tanny's plotline I found to happen off page, which kind of annoyed me because a lot of what she does is really quite important. And she was honestly one of the more interesting characters. Ede I loved as a character, and Tanny was at my close second. You know, but we see almost all her downtime and none of her the active things that happen to her. So again, like I said, the pacing of this was just really weird. It was just really oddly written, with a lot of, like, you know, her inner monologues and her reflection on things that have happening on page, and then we don't actually see the things that happened on page either. We're just told about them, which I think just kind of lets the story down a little bit too much. Tanny's plotline as well, just because of this, feels very expositional, and you know, she bounces around a lot. I found it very difficult to get into a rhythm with her story because it changed constantly. You know, one minute she's doing this, and then you think you're going to get that for a amount of time, and then all of a sudden she's moved to this place and she's doing that, and then now she's not there anymore and she's at a different place and she's doing something else. And yeah, like I said, because obviously, you know, you're not seeing half the stuff she's doing, you're just getting told about it. there's just no rhythm to her story, and it's very difficult, I think, to sort of get into reading it. Niklace is a really interesting character. He's obviously, you know, he's my favourite because I think she was the most well-rounded character, but Niklace is, you know, one of our 4 point of view characters, and he has the most depth. You know, he's the most flawed. He is easily one of the best written character of the 4. You could delete him from the story and have the same story. Like, it's such a shame, but he serves no purpose to this story apart from the longest fuck off world building thing you've ever seen in your entire life. Like, his entire plot kind of almost revolves around this one plot point that is basically just exposition for some of the world building, and that's it. And it's such a shame because he's such an interesting character to follow up until that point. Like, he's got such interesting motivations, and he's flawed, and he's selfish, and he's got this sort of, you know, tragic past almost where his like lover died and he's still grieving that, and sadly he contributes nothing to the story, unfortunately. You know, he's in the East and he's been exiled by Sabran because he's an alchemist, and when she was a bit younger he promised her he could create an elixir that would, you know, he promised her he could create the elixir for life. But then he spent all the funding she gave him on alcohol and stuff because he has a drinking problem and stuff, so when she found out that he'd been using her money for, you know, not what she was paying him to do, she kind of exiled him and stuff. And, you know, he's exiled to this place, he's far away from home and he can never return. So he's got this deep hatred for Sabran and is like wanting to succeed at creating the elixir for life, almost purely so that he can get position and power back and go home, and then also so that he can keep it from her as like revenge. You know, he's such an interesting character with such interesting selfish motivations. He's this bitter, manipulative old man, but he contributes fucking nothing to the story. And his whole alchemy plotline feels like a random subplot that, again, could have just been deleted from the entire story and it probably would have flowed a bit better. As I said, it basically serves as the most roundabout way to introduce another concept to the world building that in the end also has no bearing on anything else. It's just kind of like an explanation for something that we kind of didn't care about. There's a lot of that in this book that needed trimming, and unfortunately Niklace and his entire plotline was one of them. However, he's still a really enjoyable character to read. I did enjoy his portions of the book. That's one thing I find really funny about this story. Like I said, I'm complaining a lot, but I did really enjoy all these characters and all the stuff that was happening. Like, I have really mixed opinions on this book. Our final point of view is Loth, and he's sort of like Queen Sabran's one of her best friends. But he starts off his story, you kind of hear about him from other characters because he's sort of vanished and we don't really know what's happened to him. And then once his point of view kicks in, you find out that he's actually been sent to this island country who used to be an ally to Inis and Sabran, but has recently defected away from their religion and has now started worshipping the Nameless One and all the High Western Dragons. So he's actually been sent to Escalus and as an ambassador, basically. But it's against his will, he didn't really know what's happening, and it's been done by the Spy Master, who has kind of sent him there because there are rumours that he and Sabran are lovers, and the Spy Master think that this is going to affect Sabran's potential to marry, which obviously is a very important thing in this world. So he's sort of almost being sent into this place where he's not really expected to come back from because of it's very dangerous for anyone who doesn't worship the Nameless One to go there. And he's sort of going there with his friend they've both been sent off by the Spy Master as ambassadors, and also to try and find out what happened to the previous Escalus ambassador, who was Sabran's father, because he's not been heard from since the country defected and started worshipping the Nameless One. Loth and the Queen are supposed to be incredibly good friends, but you almost don't get that, I guess because, you know, you don't actually see them interact a whole lot, and I just feel that, you know, you're supposed to believe that they're this incredibly close friendship, so much so that people believe that they're lovers, but again, you just don't really feel like that, because a lot of my problem with this book is that a lot of things are told and not shown. I could really feel like it could have just done with some flashbacks or reminiscing some things that they had done together, as well as maybe, not a point of view from Sabran, but maybe if she's speaking to Ede or one of her other handmaidens, she could just talk about Loth and their friendship and how much she misses him perhaps. You know, I really felt that like their friendship was something that we were told and not shown. And Loth's point of view, it sort of does a really interesting way to see this other country and how these people worship dragons. You know, the stuff with religions and stuff in this book I really, really enjoyed. You know, he acts as a very interesting point of view for quite a lot of things. He does end up going all over the place, but it feels a bit more with purpose than with Tanny's point of view. Like I said, Tanny bounces around a lot of different places, but a lot of it feels like it serves no purpose. Again, it feel, you know, as I said, it felt like the author was trying to subvert expectations all the time. Whereas Loth, it does actually kind of feel like he's got a point as to why he's going to different places. So he was a really interesting point of view to follow, to just see more of the world. One of the few characters that actually does develop over the course of the story. Like, he kind of learns to question everything he's being taught and understand that people have different ways of life and to respect that. Because one thing I do find quite interesting in this book is the idea that, you know, Sabran and her people think that their religion is like, you know, the true religion, and they don't really understand how other people can believe in different things. You know, they force people to convert their religion and stuff, and, you know, it was really interesting to see him go from basically being one of those people to understanding that there can be different beliefs and they can almost coexist with one another, and it's okay to still respect that. But again, his plotline rushes from place to place and he spends very little time in Scalis, and which, again, as I said, it's built up that that's going to be his, you know, you'd think he'd spend most of his time there, but he actually spends very little time with the book in the place that he were told constantly. Like, we spent a lot of time following him on his journey to Scalis. Like, we see him travel there, but then he's there for like 5 fucking minutes and then he's gone again. It's just like, well, okay, what? Again, feels like she's trying to almost subvert our expectations, but all it does is hurt the pacing. And I think it's such a shame as well, because they built up this whole idea of him having to go in as an ambassador, but he's basically being sent as a spy, despite the fact that he's got no spy experience and it's an incredibly dangerous country to go to, especially for someone from Innis. And I just think it's such a shame that that whole idea was just kind of not explored as much as it could have been, because that's a really interesting sort of like, you know, court intrigue type plot line of, you know, a spy who's not a spy having to try and survive in such a dangerous environment. I was really looking forward to reading that, and I was kind of sad that we didn't get that. Sabran was quite an interesting character. It was good to see how the author approached the lonely monarch type, because that is definitely her sort of archetype and her character. And I found her to be more interesting than I first thought. You know, we see her almost exclusively from Ede's point of view. She spends the most time with her, but, you know, and initially I just thought that I didn't even know where we were going with Sabran's character, but I actually really enjoyed what we got. I thought she was really interesting, but perhaps not as developed as I would have liked. You know, but you find out that there's a lot more going under the surface with her, and the way she behaves and the things she thinks are all quite well rationalised according to how she's been raised and what people have told her about herself and her country and stuff. I enjoy her and Ede's interactions throughout the book, especially when Ede kind of starts to challenge her a little bit. I really enjoyed just that, like, conflict between the two of them, especially since Sabran's not used to somebody disagreeing with her or challenging her. I just really enjoyed what that brought out in both of their characters. It was a fun dynamic to read. Again though, Sabran suffers from any lack of character development. We have more of a character exploration with her, but even then it's not as deep as it should be if you're not actually going to change the character as she goes along. That's kind of my issue with a lot of this book. As I said, it's a very plot-driven book, and I say that because the characters don't change. Like, there is like no character development in this story apart from maybe with Niklaus. Everyone else is more or less the same people they were at the start of the story. And I think that's such a shame, because there's so much potential for them to grow and become different people with different attitudes. As I said, Loth does kind of change. You know, he gets a little bit more of appreciation for other ways of life and stuff, but that's about it. Almost every other character just doesn't get any development, and I think that's such a shame because they're all really interesting characters. Margaret is Loth's sister and Ede's sort of best friend. She's also quite close with the Queen, and I thought she was a really sweet addition to our cast of like central characters. She's a very supportive person. She worries for her brother and for Ede, but she doesn't really do all that much in the book, and the one small adventure that she kind of goes on, she doesn't really do anything except be a plot device, which I think was a shame. I would have really liked to see her do a lot more as a character, because I think she was, again, just someone quite interesting who could have contributed a lot more than she did. So those are all the main characters, and the other characters that have any importance really, and the other characters that have any importance really without getting into spoilers. There was an interesting cast of characters. They all felt like different people and with different sort of like motivations and layers to them. But I think it's a shame that a lot of them didn't get the page time that they deserve or the development that they deserve. I feel like they would have contributed to a fantastic story if they had been written better into the narrative and actually changed and grew as people according to the experiences that they go through. As I said, a lot of the characters that we were introduced to are either killed off or never mentioned again. And the ones that die, it never feels like their deaths have any importance because we've not spent any time with them to give a shit, really. It really feels like they're being brought in so that she can kill off characters to be like, oh look, this has got stakes, everybody dies. It's like, well, you're not actually killing off anyone important, are you? You know, plot armour is such a thing in this book, I will warn you now. As for the world building, you have the East and the West as the two main focuses of the story. Sabran and Eid are in the West, and this is a country that hates dragons, both those that breathe fire, so the High Westerns, as well as those that are like water dragons, so, you know, like Chinese dragons and stuff all traditionally spit water instead of fire. I thought it was really interesting to have both ideas, you know, the sort of Western idea of dragons versus the Eastern idea of dragons sort of woven into the story. And yeah, in the West they have this religion that's almost Arthurian Knights of the Round Table inspired. It's a religion that says that there was this knight in the past who was the one to banish the Nameless One, and it's from this man who Sabran is descended, and everyone who follows this religion chooses a patron knight and will follow their sort of like virtues, so the Knight of Courage, the Knight of Fellowship. You know, if you want, I think it's once you turn 16 you choose your patron knight and then you adhere to their values. I think it was just such an interesting idea because as well, you know, it's never in any doubt that these were real people, these are real people, you have their descendants, but they've almost now not become gods. They're never thought of as gods, but they're just thought of as people to worship and people to adhere to who, like, you know, their values and stuff. You know, they were the brave people that vanquished the Nameless One. I did think that I find that quite interesting because obviously most religions do adhere to there being some all-powerful being, kind of, you know, a god figure. Whereas I liked that this was just a religion based on their ancestors and stuff. I thought that was really interesting. Then in the East, they worship dragons and consider them to be gods, even though they perhaps fight alongside them. And there's not much more to this religion. I find it to be far more underdeveloped than the Virtudom religion. Dragon riders are incredibly high ranking and highly respected, and a dragon rules alongside the human emperor. I thought that was a really interesting thing to almost have two rulers, with the human emperor and then also his dragon, and them both being of like equal rank. If anything, the dragon ranks higher than the emperor. I thought it was a really interesting idea. And as well as the dragon riders who have to go from seeing the dragons as gods, which is what they've been taught their entire life, to the dragons then turning around and being like, nah, you're my rider, you're my buddy. And them sort of almost having to be like, what? We're equals? What? And the dragon's like, yeah, cool, it's cool, man. I'm not a god, it's fine, we're cool. Like, I thought that was quite an interesting idea. It was really fun to watch that happen, especially with Tane. There's also a detail in the Eastern country to dress as though you have just like stepped out of water, you know, with like silks or wet slicked back hair, fabrics and stuff. I just thought that was a really interesting idea, just like obviously because they worship dragons that are very water based and they're an island community and stuff, so it was just like an interesting detail to bring in. And I kind of wish there had been a little bit more about, I don't know, fashion and stuff, and just like little details like that just make the world feel so rich. I did love the world building in this story. There was a lot to it and it was very well thought out. We also see a little bit about those who worship the fire-breathing dragons and their thought process behind it, but overall I did feel that was underdeveloped and wasn't as like, you know, we didn't see as much of that as I would have liked. Again, we were told rather than shown. It didn't feel as developed as the other religious practices. We also see Eid's true religion and the story of the Priory that is founded on. I liked that it went down this route of history being told by the winners and how history can be changed and edited. That's sort of like an extra little plot line that's woven in quite well to a lot of different aspects of the story, and I did really enjoy that whole idea. I love when characters in worlds criticise history and myths and actually try to find out what actually happened and what was true, even if it means challenging their very religious beliefs. I also really liked that we have two different types of dragons in this book. It would have been really easy for Samantha Shannon to either make all dragons the good guys or all dragons the bad guys. But instead what she's done, as I said, you've got the fire-breathing dragons who are like the bad guys and the water dragons are still good guys kind of thing. It just sort of adds some nuance to the story, as I said, you know, by not just making dragons a monolith. You know, with the people in the East worship dragons, but they only worship the water dragons. They don't worship the Nameless One at all. That's an entirely different sort of religion sort of thing. And I like that they make that distinction of being able to like, yeah, no, the Nameless One is still our enemy as well kind of thing. We just support these water dragons who are our friends. Again, that whole idea of the two different religions surrounding dragons and the two different types of dragons felt underutilised and didn't add as much to the story as it maybe should have. And there's this whole thing about draconic plague. There's this plague that goes around that is thought to have been spread from the High Western Dragons originally. The island community in the east sort of cut themselves off, they don't let anybody in. And that's the whole thing, but again, the draconic plague, again, you could cut it and kind of have the same story. It doesn't really add anything apart from being a plot device at times, and I kind of wish more had been done with that. Especially with the sort of Eastern, Western dragons, and then a plague coming from them, people worshipping the dragons in different ways. Like, I just kind of feel that there could have been more done with that. You know, it has no bearing on the plot or the world, apart from this one detail at the start, really, and then it's kind of, and then like a plot device later in the book, and then it's never relevant again. And that's, as I said, an issue with a lot of things in this book. Introduced once, they're mentioned again. I did like a lot of the world building. A lot of the plot twists about different things were really great and had a lot of impact. I did like all the characters that we follow. I did find them all quite easy to read. As I said, there was just a few pacing issues, but overall, like, the way the plot unfolded was quite interesting. Overarching mystery, almost mystery kind of surrounding the Nameless One, Sabran's heritage, how the Nameless One was stopped previously, whose story is the truth. You know, it was just these really sort of different ideas that kind of all came together quite nicely. However, the pacing did really let the story down, and the complete lack of character depth and development was just, I'm astonished kind of that wasn't like fixed in editing. As I've said a lot already, loads of important things happen off page, are over too quickly, or have no build up to them whatsoever and feel very pulled out of nowhere. And for people who are perhaps, you know, if for people who are bothered by that, they would probably DNF this book quite quickly. It really just feels like it just needs more editing work. It kind of still feels like almost it's still a draft and things need to be reshuffled, and, you know, they need to point and go, no, make that happen off page, trim this bit. You know, it feels like it's a book that's almost there because it has all the right things. That's one thing that I find about this book, is that I have such mixed opinions on it because it has all the right stuff. It's just the execution is not great. It has all these different characters and character relationships and ideas that I love. It has all this amazing world building. It has a plot that's really, really good, and lots of different plot twists and ideas and developments and stuff, but they're just not all done in the right way. And I just feel like it just needs reshuffling and a bit more depth to some of it, and then you would have a really, really great book. But I also just think, my opinion of it is that it needs to be a series of maybe like 3, 4, 5 books or something. Like, a lot happens in this one book. It is quite a big book, you know, it's like 845 pages, but still, that's not enough time for everything because so much stuff just gets rushed past. It doesn't develop the right things in the right places at the right time for the right amount of time. I think that's such a shame because, as I said, this is a really great story. Like I said, oh my god, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, I loved this book, but at the same time I didn't like this book. Because, as I said, it's almost like I love the potential of this book. Yeah, I liked the potential of this book. And that's kind of why I recommend it to people, because it still does all these really interesting stuff. It's just not written particularly well, I don't think. And I think it needed to be a series. So would I recommend it? Like, yes and no. I would recommend it because I want to see what different people's opinions are. As I said, some people love it. Some people are like me and think it needs to be a series. Some people hated it. Some people DNF'd it. Some people did enjoy some parts. You know, it's been quite a mixed response, I think, to this story. And that's why I kind of would say I would recommend it, because they'll do some really interesting stuff, and I'm curious to see what people's opinions are. It's definitely a step up from the Bone season, which is another book by Samantha Shannon that I read last year. And I hated that book. I think I would recommend it, if only for you to decide your opinion of it yourself. As I said, I've seen a lot of people disagree on lots of different parts. You know, some people love it, some people hate it, some people have no opinion, and some people love the writing, some people find the writing to be quite annoying. It's definitely a controversial one, but not hugely controversial, it's just more subtle, like tinier details. I gave this, I think, a 3.5 stars, like it is really slap bang in the middle for me. There were plenty of things I liked, plenty of things I didn't like, and neither one really weighed enough for me to, you know, shove the rating this way or that, to be able to come to a final decision on whether I actually liked this book. Go on, read it for yourselves, let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. So that's the end of my spoiler-free review for Priory of the Orange Tree. If you've made it this far, well done. I think this is going to be quite a long video, even once I've edited stuff out. Yeah, I don't think I'll really go into spoilers. Yeah, I think I've kind of covered everything and this review's long enough. I will do a spoiler discussion as well, because this spoiler-free review's long enough, and I think I still have things to say that people who read the book might be curious about. So, thank you very much for watching. Congratulations if you made it to the end. Have you read The Priory of the Orange Tree? What did you think of it? Definitely let me know down in the comments, because as I said, I'm very interested to see what people's opinions of this book are. If you haven't read The Priory of the Orange Tree, I hope you enjoyed my review. I hope it has perhaps given you enough information to decide whether you want to read it or not. And if you do read it, please come back and tell me what you think of it. As I said, I am so interested to see what people think of this book. If you reached the end of this video, as I said, congratulations, and feel free to give it a like and leave a comment below, and feel free to subscribe. I post once or twice a week depending on how much time I have. But thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.